Day 1024 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzie here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. So starting off, we'll take a look at those Russian losses, as currently Russia sits on more than 903,000 military personnel losses, just blasting past that 900k mark, with a day that includes an additional 1,470 losses. It was also a big day for hardware, which is in line with the operational tempo of the map over the weekend, with losses including 9 tanks, 27 APVs, with these first two figures comparatively lower due to the sporadic hardware constraints faced by some segments of the Russian army, followed by a whopping 104 artillery systems, 6 rocket launchers and 5 air defense systems, and a hefty 185 soft targets. Continuing to show that losses for anything on 4 wheels is much more weighted towards non-military Russian army operated vehicles, aka civilian vehicles. And now we head across to the Russian map, where more unfeathered birds of democracy flew into Russian airspace over the weekend, with this directional route map illustrating the indirect paths taken by Ukrainian UAVs to navigate and hit their targets, avoiding certain regions as a means to minimize the impact resulting from Russian air defense installation sites. And in that spirit, a number of UAVs made their way to Voronezh, where a significant fire has erupted, with unconfirmed sources suggesting a Ukrainian strike on a Russian military HQ. Meanwhile, Russian officials have dismissed these claims, attributing the fire to reeds burning, quote unquote. In other words, they say, essentially just a grass fire in the middle of the night, in a cold climate, at the same time as one-way attack drone sorties in the very same location. So that's either an amazing coincidence or something important was targeted. Now, just prior to this event, Russian air defenses were activated in the Rostov region with an interception noted, although clearly not enough to stop the subsequent attack on Voronezh. Then heading across to Smolensk of Russia, where Ukraine-aligned Atesh agents sabotaged a rail transformer, disrupting Russian military supply lines leading through to Bryansk and Kursk. They took a photo and left a calling card. They are nowhere, but they are everywhere. And now to a couple of updates on the Russian map, where the Kavkazskaya oil transshipment point in Krasnodar was still smoking throughout the weekend, following a series of previous Ukrainian drone strikes on this facility. Even just last night, a major fire at the oil pumping station was observed, absolutely dwarfing the nearby tree line and quite likely able to be seen from space. So these ongoing fires cover a series of related infrastructure objects of the Caspian Pipeline Consortium, with that series of fires that remains uncontrolled into their 5th day now. If they were to reach day 15, then that would be an SMO record, referring there to a Rostov oil depot that contained a blaze that was not able to be put out for those 15 days last year. And now to an update on the Engels Air Base, after a strike on the Saratov location from just a few days ago. Now, first of all, I'll mention that regional authorities originally referred to the damage at the airbase as being damage to some sort of small and irrelevant building on the outskirts of the airbase. But given the satellite imagery updates we now see, it appears that 10 or 11 ammunition storage facilities were affected in that recent strike. Therefore, combining this latest update with the multiple detonations originally seen during the initial strikes reported days earlier, well, fair to say the damage is looking quite relevant to the operation of the site. Then moving across on the map, finally, and still within Russia, to Belgorod, as Russian reports continue to indicate clashes in the region, as the AFU pushes through the Krasnoyarshky district, crossing the border, clearing barriers, and slipping behind Russian lines. Reports of an opposing nature have also existed, where previously the Russian angle has suggested AFU encirclements with the threat of a Ukrainian incursion all but eliminated. However, Russian sources also continue to indicate fierce clashes in the region, suggesting otherwise. But then, more recently, there were various reports suggesting that Russian troops themselves face a dire situation in Belgorod, with up to 1,000 soldiers at risk of encirclement near Grafovka and Demidovka. But it hasn't stopped there, as multiple reports also suggested military engagements at Prilosy, adjacent to Grafovka, suggesting a coordinated push by the armed forces of Ukraine in this Russian border area, and doing so expanding at a distance some 10 kilometers wide now. Now, take it all with a grain of salt, if you will. Information is still patchy for this sector, but nonetheless, it appears the message that the Russian MOD is receiving in this Belgorod district is loud and clear. The AFU has the capability to commence cross-border incursions beyond their own northern border. Oh, and also, in a related blow, at the end of last week, the Ukrainian Air Force struck a command post at Glatovo, destroying vital communications and technical equipment, further putting on display that the pressure is mounting on Russia to bolster its border defenses against an increasingly bold Ukrainian set of offensives in the region, and by extension their entire north. Then finally headed across, finding our way to the Ukrainian map, as the Ukrainian Defense Forces liberated the settlement of Nadia in the northeastern pocket of the front lines. Although, to be more precise, the village of Nadia is impressively east of the border of Kharkiv, instead putting it on the edges of neighboring Luhansk. It always feels quite symbolic every time Ukraine takes back some of that Luhansk land. Now, headed across to the Kupiansk direction, where there are recent reports of Ukrainian forces pushing Russian forces out of Zapadne, a location that's adjacent to a former Russian salient position that Ukrainian forces took back 2 or 3 weeks ago, as indicated in the blue. And then to now head across down the map, because the weekend witnessed a series of back and forth territorial exchanges, including where Russian forces took up additional positions just northwest of Ivanivka, which is west of the Zerbets River. Russian forces had previously moved into the lower Ivanivka area itself just after New Year's, and have since used those positions as part of some typical brute force tactics to push further west. From here, Russia would ideally want to extend an additional 30 kilometers, or about 20 miles, further west to the Oskil River, and to do so as a means to affect Ukrainian supply lines, although such a long-haul strategy would likely necessitate the heavy expenditure of manpower and armored vehicles. Then down we head on the map to some further Russian updates on the Pokrovsk front, as advised by members of the Russian army positioned in this region. In a nutshell, they say they lost momentum with this sector's offensives due to Ukraine cutting off their logistics, extending all the way to their rear as far as Seladova, which is something that's consistent with what we know already about other AFU activities behind Russian front lines in the last month or two. They also mentioned that this was largely achieved through Ukraine's use of FPV kamikaze drones. Then, with a great deal of activity happening all around the map, as shown with this rapid-fire segment, as Ukrainian aircraft carried out 2 airstrikes on a Russian base in occupied Novokakhovka of the Kherson region, on the left bank of the Dnipro River, near the old hydroelectric dam. We then saw the 11th Brigade of the National Guard of Ukraine shoot down 3 Russian reconnaissance Zala drones. Then also for Kherson again, but for a completely different set of activities, as a Russian video blogger filmed his current lodgings on this front, speaking about how nice this Ukrainian-occupied location once was, where the people had once lived good lives, but going on to state that his unit moved into this such house last November. But also, in stereotypical Russian soldier style, this Russian filmographer also admitted that he and his comrades looted the place. Also in the east, reported by Ukrainian command, one of Russia's jet aviation-launched Cab munitions missed its mark, flying into a forested area, missing the target due to electronic warfare countermeasures deployed by the AFU. And fair to say, this is getting quite common now, with an abundance of reports by this stage on this type of activity. Then also on the map, Ukrainian fighters spotted a 122mm D-30 howitzer of the invader army and destroyed its ammo with precise strikes, severely damaging the howitzer and destroying a great deal of ammo. In the Russian artillerists' words, Ukraine had smashed up the storage pits to bits, everything is melted and all torn up. Plus, the Ukrainian strike created a massive hole in the artillery piece itself. Peekaboo. Then also seen on the map was a Ukrainian-operated fiber-optic FPV drone of the Magyar unit, destroying a number of items including a BM-21 Grad multiple launch rocket system, an MTLB, and another self-propelled howitzer. Then lastly to mention on the map today, another Ukrainian FPV drone captures another Russian soldier, a newly minted POW, receiving instructions for where to surrender. It's a happy ending, this one. Then headed across to a little bit of news today, so ceasefire talks in Saudi Arabia, with delegations from Kyiv, Moscow and Washington set to convene in the Middle East country tomorrow, Monday, March 24. The US is facilitating separate discussions with Russian and Ukrainian teams focusing on finalizing a limited long-range strike ceasefire deal initially agreed upon later last week. However, it remains to be seen what further restrictions Russia looks to impose on any upcoming agreements. Although, in a related topic, which might already give us some answers on that question, because it's been reported that Russia is rejecting more of Trump's peace plans, specifically where it comes to the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, with current Russian director of the nuclear plant, Yuri Chernychuk, speaking to Russian state media outlet TASS on the matter, stating, quote, "No one but Russia will control the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, it's property that belongs to the Russian Federation." So this latest update, it expresses a sentiment from the Russian side that marks a change of approach from what President Trump had only just recently suggested. We'll soon see how that one is navigated. Then in some more news, and perhaps to the most unsettling news of the moment, is where Steve Witkoff, Trump's special envoy to Russia, suggested during a recent interview that regions such as Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson rightfully belong to Russia, citing referendums with an overwhelming majority in favor of annexing to Russia. Now, these so-called referendums were conducted under duress with armed Russian oversight, with no shortage of video and photographic evidence on that front, rendering them illegitimate, not to mention they were performed at a time of an occupying military presence, making any outcome from those referendums illegal and not at all internationally recognized. Officially, the Trump administration has never outright stated or attempted to enforce these regions as being sovereign Russian lands, and they're probably well aware that any proposal urging Ukraine to officially recognize their status as so would be met with a firm rejection from Kyiv, and of course, Europe. Then headed across to an oddity of a segment to round off the video. I should name these types of segments Russians doing Russian things, because also, somewhere in the east, and as part of a bit of a dick move, the Russian army showcased deliveries of blue Ukrainian-colored armband tape, stating their usage of the tape for their own upcoming attacks. They said the idea was to put on the tape, go on a mission, and if they succeed, then take off the armbands, which is a series of actions that is, as you may surely know, against the Geneva Convention and is indeed a war crime. But it also shows the lengths to which Russia will go to when they're failing to achieve their SMO goals via means of conventional warfare tactics. Luckily for the AFU, they've been onto these types of Russian activities for quite some time now, neutralizing these rebranded Russian offensives many a time by this stage, giving these blue-armed bandits of the Russian forces a false sense of security. So that's it for today, guys. Thanks again for watching. Please continue to like, comment, and subscribe, support all of those helpful, wonderful things for the channel. And I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers!